Praised be Jesus and Mary. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment, and so one who fears is not yet perfect in love. Let's take this opportunity to review the concept of contrition, or sorrow for sin. As we know, there are two types of contrition, or two types of sorrow for sin, two motives for sorrow for sin. Contrition is perfect when there is no fear in it. Contrition for sin is perfect when we regret having offended God simply for the fact that we have offended God and that we have lost His friendship. We have put ourselves outside of His friendship. Imperfect contrition contains that element of fear. We are sorry for our sins because of the fear of the punishment due to them, whether it be just purgatory for venial sin or the remnants of forgiven mortal sin, whether it be the fear of hell for unforgiven mortal sin or other punishments of God. There are these two types of contrition we know. And God requires of us, when we approach the sacrament of confession, that we have at least imperfect contrition, at least a fear of God's punishments, which combined with sacramental absolution is sufficient to cleanse us of our sins, to forgive us of all the guilt due to them. However, what we sometimes forget or don't think of or maybe don't even know is that God's friendship, even before the sacrament of confession can be received, we can be restored in God's friendship by perfect contrition, by a sorrow for sin motivated simply by regret of having lost His friendship. This is useful to know for different reasons. In extraordinary circumstances, sometimes we cannot get to confession. A person who has no access to a priest and to sacramental absolution must still be reconciled to God, and he can do that. He can be reconciled to God precisely by an act of perfect contrition. This could happen if somebody is, for example, dying in a war. There's no chaplain, and he must be reconciled to God. This desire to be restored in God's friendship, this desire to restore this communion with God, this sorrow which casts out fear but looks at love of God alone, is enough to be forgiven. There has to be a desire for confession contained in it. But if confession is impossible, God forgives right then and there. Another example may be more easily to one to which a Catholic might more easily relate. A person might commit a mortal sin often and cannot go to confession immediately after each one. He has to wait until a confessor becomes available, until he can go to confession. If such a person thinks that in the meantime he cannot be forgiven, that can lead him either to despair or presumption and more sin. And this is an erroneous way of thinking. A person who sins can and cannot make an immediate confession can nonetheless be immediately forgiven if he makes an act of perfect contrition. If he's sorry for his sin because it has deprived him of God's love, because it has deprived him of God's friendship, and because he wants that love back. He wants that friendship back. He wants to live God's life again. He wants to live in communion with God again. And as I mentioned before, this is an important element to remember. This act of perfect contrition includes the desire for the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, or confession, all synonyms, and the intention to go to sacramental confession at the very first opportunity. So it's not a surrogate, it's not a substitute, it's not a way around confession. Rather, it's a way to anticipate it. It's a way to anticipate its effects. It's not a parallel option. It includes the desire and real intention to actually go to confession. But until that can happen, until that realistic possibility becomes rather a reality, a person who has been reconciled to God by perfect contrition is nonetheless reconciled to God. Although he cannot, in the meantime, also receive Holy Communion. Holy Communion can come only after sacramental absolution is received. All of us, all Catholics, should value God's friendship above all things. And even if we're not guilty of serious sin, we should make frequent acts of perfect contrition to ask forgiveness for our serious sins of the past, for the venial sins of the present. And in so doing, we show our love for God. We grow in the perfection of our love, casting out all fear. And we prove our aversion to sin, which offends him. In so doing, also, we surely receive more abundant graces to sin no more, but rather to live always in profound communion of perfect love with God. Praised be Jesus and Mary.